Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my annual video discussing horror design when it comes to video games. There should be a separate video going up somewhere around here in the near future. But horror, and by extension horror gameplay, is one of the hardest aspects to do justice to. It's both dependent on the actual production, as in how you design the situation, cinematography, etc., and on the person themselves. For me, when I was a child, I was a scaredy cat. Couldn't watch anything horror related. Nightmare on Elm Street, well, gave me nightmares, as it would be implied. And it wasn't until my mid-teens, early 20s that I just got or developed a complete desensitization towards horror. Today I can watch everything from Hellraiser to Return of the Living Dead to Saw, you name it, and it doesn't even make me bat an eye anymore. And that's one of the things that makes horror such a fascinating topic to discuss, and why it is so hard to do right. Because just because you will think something is scary doesn't mean that everybody else does. I'm sure for you watching this right now that there are a few of you out there who probably got scared playing Five Nights at Freddy's or Outlast or Slender Man. For me, those games put me to sleep. And trying to figure out what is and what isn't horror is a very fascinating topic, and one that we are not going to get to in this whole video. I could spend like 30 minutes to an hour just on my own discussing this topic. But when it comes to the absolute basics of horror, the DNA or foundation of how to create a horror game, there are some universal aspects that you need to consider when building your game. The first one has to do with the ability to create or remove or build up and release tension. Jumpscare. This is an essential part of any horror situation, and you see this especially in so many horror movies from the past to today, that they will do what they can to get you, nervous or anxious, and then do the big scare. And of course, as everyone knows, a big part of that is a jump scare. I was waiting for something to show up right there. But the problem when it comes to the build-up and release of tension is that it has to be done properly. If you do too many releases, as in just constantly assaulting the player with scary or disturbing imagery, they're going to become desensitized to it. This is why Doom, for instance, is not a horror game. Even though you are literally fighting demons in hell, it's basically, it's the same demon that I just killed the last 50 times with my chain gun or my rocket launcher. It doesn't become scary at that point. But on the other hand, if you do too much in terms of build-up, as in you're just constantly elevating the mood but nothing happens to release it, then the person's going to realize that there is no worry here. So why should I be afraid? And this is the issue that I have with stuff like Amnesia. And even something like Outlast, that, yes, scary stuff is happening all around me, lights are flickering, there's weird noises, but I'm not in any real danger. Nothing is going to happen that is going to directly impact me. So once I've come to that realization, that's it. And this is why the many indie games that just make entirely use out jump scares tend to fade away as you play them longer. Because, again, a jump scare is only scary the first time you do it. Once it happens 2 or 3 times, you're going to expect that. In Resident Evil 1, for instance, the famous dog jumping through the window scene, everybody who played that game for the first time jumped. Don't try and lie to me here, folks. I know we all did. But once you've gotten used to that, then you expect it. If an enemy jumps through a ceiling grate, the first time it happens, yes, it's shocking. But then you come to expect that, okay, if there's a ceiling grate above me, there's a chance something's going to pop out of it. And this is what we were talking about on our live show, that one of the big things that kind of hurt the horror of Doom 3, not Doom 2016, was that the monster closet, or should I say quote-unquote monster closet, used the same texture for each one of those. So it's basically, I walk in a room, there's that same texture. I guess maybe something's going to come out there when I pick up this key that's directly in the middle of the room. Who knows? But moving on, another big point about horror, and this is one that we talked about on our stream, is the idea of player agency or control. How much does the player actually have an impact as to what's going on? Again, this is a big difference between a game like Doom 2016 and something like Clock Tower or Fatal Frame and any of the other horror games you can imagine. That in Doom, I am in 100% control no matter what happens. I am running around with 8 different guns, full body armor, 150 points of health, while death metal music is blaring. So why should I be afraid? Obviously, you're not going to do that. But when we look at a lot of horror games, this is why they take away elements or control from the player. When you play Clock Tower, for instance, you can't directly fight enemies. The same goes for Haunting Ground, and even the early parts of Resident Evil 7 and Silent Hill. And any control they do give you is still measured. You're never going to hit a point in a true horror game where you are 100% badass. I always go back to this example, but it needs to be said. There's a scene in Evil Dead 2 when Ash is going down into the cellar, and he's got his chainsaw in one hand, chainsaw attached to the other hand, and in any other movie, this would be the action, we're building things up, there's going to be heavy music playing. But what they did was they turned this into a horror moment. It's very quiet, there's only ambient noise around, and Ash is terrified. He has 2 devastating weapons at hand, but he's still scared as to what's going on. And that is a huge point about terror. This is one of the big things they did with Dead Space, or at least with the first one. That, yes, you are wearing a full exosuit and you have a railgun and a grenade launcher and all these weapons, but you're still just one man, or one very flimsy man who can't take a lot of hits. And you're always in that situation where, yes, I'm armed, but I can't really, fight 5 or 10 of these guys at one time. And it's very important to understand just how much control you want to give the player and build that into the design. A great example of another game, and then we'll move on to some game footage, is Condemned. In the first Condemned, you are literally fighting with whatever you can pick up around the environment. Whether it's a sledgehammer, a rhubarb bar, a mannequin arm or leg you can use. In the second game, you actually pick up a bowling ball and smack bad guys with it. But that would be a completely different experience if you were walking around with a heavy assault rifle grenade launcher combo. And another point that Condemned did that will kind of lead into our third point is that it kept the player guessing. It kept things from becoming routine. And that is going to take us to our final lesson, and we got some game footage to go to. And now a quick jump scare. Shout out to the supporters over on patreon.com/GWBicer. Resident Evil 7 was a really good example in the first part of the game of the third major point I want to talk about as a basic of horror. And that is keeping the player guessing. During the first half of the game, basically up until you leave the house for the first time, you can be assaulted by Jack from many different areas. Some of them are fixed, as in you open up a specific door or go to a specific area and he will track you. But other times, once he is essentially in play, he will start hunting you around the various parts of the house, including breaking down walls and just being a general nuisance. And this is a major part about good horror design, that the player cannot get into set routines, be it from an enemy standpoint, as in fighting the same enemy types, from an environmental standpoint, just going to the same exact looking areas, and from just the horror standpoint. Like we said in the last section, if I get scared by the 10 same looking monster closets, eventually I'm going to develop a resistance to it. And good horror games, or the ones that really do manage to get people terrified, will keep the player guessing. One of my favorite examples was from Fatal Frame 3, that while the game tried to have two separate areas, one being the nightmare, one being the safe zone, they started to mess around with when the player could start seeing ghosts and where they would be getting attacked from. And when the player doesn't have a set guidance as to how the game is going to play out, that does so much for terror. There's also other aspects, such as knowing how to handle the mood and aesthetics, but those are definitely more advanced than what we're going to talk about. Now, another thing is that when I think about good horror design, I'm reminded of a game design that I came up with, basically my dream horror title. And in that game, I came up with this concept of the area itself will be procedurally generated, but would feature essentially quote-unquote mega events. That is when a singular enemy or some unstoppable thing will happen, and the player has to accommodate and adjust for it. So it's not just, I'm going to fight an enemy, the same 5 enemies each time. It's like maybe something scary will happen. Maybe like a insane hunter with his head in like a lantern on his gun will start tracking me, and I will have no way of dealing with him otherwise. And I'll need to figure out how to get around them. And here's a fun fact. That idea came from a nightmare I had when the hunter shot me in the chest in a graveyard. And as another interesting tidbit, Nightmare on Elm Street is pretty much a lie. I have died many times in my dreams, and I'm still here. And in fact, when this video is over, we're going to go through a quick list of all the ways I can remember that I've been killed in my dreams. So be sure to look forward to that. But to begin to wrap things up for today, horror design relies on a lot of different elements to go right, and once you lose the player, you are not going to get them back. Like I mentioned with examples like Amnesia and Outlast, once I knew that there was very little agency that I had and how the build-up and release worked, I basically lost any sense of terror. And when that happens, most often horror games turn to frustration. And once the player begins to feel frustrated about a horror game, they will never feel terror again. So, with that said, for those of you watching this right now, can you think of really good examples of horror that we didn't cover? And can you think of games that did a great job of horror despite not being a horror game? Let me know in the comments below. But thanks for watching. Hopefully I didn't scare you too much with this video, and check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it. And tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Alright, so I have been eaten by zombies, shot to death, stabbed to death, eaten by zombies, strangled, disemboweled, eaten by zombies, set on fire, had a brain aneurysm, fell to my death, drowned, I got caught in an explosion, eaten by zombies, starved to death, got attacked by a chainsaw-wielding maniac, had 2 guys try to rip out my arms one time, that was a really fun one, accidentally erased everybody, that was a very unusual dream, eaten by zombies, got killed by the xenomorph, not the chest-hugging, more the big thing, and of course eaten by mutants, which is different from being eaten by zombies. But that's it, so have a happy Halloween, everybody.